Hey everybody, it's Dave here, and some people have been asking me for a quick tutorial video on how to use the pitch EG to make like a synth slide, meaning when you press a key, what will happen is the pitch changes. So, for example, 24 Karat Magic by Bruno Mars, or Uptown Funk, or you hear it a lot of the time in some of these, popular tracks where you have this pitch that just kind of starts and it goes on its own. It's almost like it's a triggered sample. So, what I wanted to do is I wanted to show you the basics of how to do the pitch change. It's not terribly complicated. But it can be a little daunting if you're not sure exactly how EGs work, which are envelope generators. So I'm going to show you that right now. So first things first, what we need to do is we need to tell the pitch to, or not the pitch, but rather it's called the amplitude generator. We need to tell the amp to keep going once we let go. So for example, if I hold the note, as soon as I let go, the note stops. So the amp EG is what we need to modify here, so that when we change the release, what happens is the release is what happens to the sound when we let go of the key. So if I increase the release, you'll notice it continues to sound for however long. Okay, so I've got a basic kind of release here, and this release is going to be entirely dependent on the sound that you're going for. In some cases, it may be you want it to sustain for an indefinite amount of time, or you might want it to hold for a very specific amount of time, and I'm going to show you how to do that. So, one of the interesting things about this envelope is that it's controlling what happens and when. So when it comes to the output, for example, the sustain is when I hold the key, what happens to the sound. So the sustain stage, if we were to turn that off, what that means is when I press the key down, it's going to go through the first couple of levels, and once it hits the sustain stage, it turns off. Now notice the release continues. The release is going to continue for a duration. So the duration is going to be, it's going to continue from whatever point that the envelope has finished. So to give you an example, I'm going to use my handy pointer stick here, which is actually just a pen top. So from a theoretical perspective, the release happens, if we were to press the note, it starts here and moves down this attack envelope, and technically that's actually the decay envelope. And then this is your break envelope. So what happens is it starts traveling down this, and the sustain will continue sustaining for however long you've told it to. So in this case, the release, rather, is going to go through this envelope. And so what happens is where I let go, when I let go of the note, that's when the release comes in, and it'll continue to release for a duration of 80. So if I were to go, and you'll notice it will continue from its loudest point. So if I were to hold it until it starts getting quiet, it's hard because this is a little bit fast. So let me actually adjust the slope so it takes a little bit longer. There. Now notice it was quiet, and when I let go, it started sustaining or releasing from there. So that's just, you can think of it this way. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to turn this release off entirely. And the reason I'm doing this is because what I want to happen is I want this note to last for, let's say, 3 seconds completely on its own. So I press it once, and I don't press and hold, I don't do anything, I just press it, and it'll automatically sustain. Well, the way we do this, I'm actually going to put this break up to 99. And what this is doing is this is making sure that the sustain, or the note, will sustain for this duration. And you can almost think of this slope now as the release. And you'll see what I mean when I press and hold the note. Right? So you can almost think of this as your release, even though I'm still technically holding the note down. Okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go back to the common page, and notice here under key zone there's this button that says hold. What this hold does is this is the same as pressing and holding the note as long as it'll go. So now I can press and let go. Now I pressed the key and let go of it right away. And you'll notice what it basically is saying is under your amp, EG, it's saying run the whole amp EG. Now, if we were to put up the sustain, for example, and I were to press the note now, the note would last forever, basically, until you either press the compare button or you change sounds twice because of the SST, which is your, I forget what it stands for, but it's the smooth sound transition. That's what it stands for. Anyway, so digression aside, what we want to do is we want to basically make this section here last as long as we want the note to be. And so in this case, this is going to be our decay. Now our decay is at 99%, or it's really 100%. It's at 99. So the decay is how long is this note going to last? Now, because it's not using numerical values, in the manual it tells you what the decay represents. So, for example, I'm just going to use 60 as an example. So it sounds like it lasted for 1 second. Like if you were to use 60 beats per minute, that seems like it was 1 second roughly. So not to say that there's any correlation there. It's just I'm randomly guessing. So I'm going to go with 78 and see how long that lasts. So that's about 5, maybe 6 seconds, which is good enough for our example. And I'm going to bring the slope down so it just cuts right off. So it's just going to go loud and then immediately be quiet. Okay, good enough. We'll put a little bit of slope there. Okay, so I've got my amp holding my note for as long as I want it to. So that's one of the kind of key features that we need to address first, is how long is this note lasting. Maybe it gets quieter, and that's something that we can address too. So it gets quieter over time. Maybe it gets louder over time. So if we wanted it to start off start off quiet and get louder, we could effectively change these two, both your time attack and your level attack here. We could change these to make it get louder until it gets to its loudest point, and then it goes quiet. But we're not going to do that. We're just going to leave it so that it's loud right away, and then it will fade off very, very quickly. So that's the amp side of things. So that's how we get that. Now we have to address the pitch. So when we go to our oscillator pitch page, this is looking at the sound itself. And what we want to do is we want to affect the pitch. So there's two pitch pages. There's pitch common, which is going to allow you to manipulate, for example, the oscillator key map. So when you press middle C, and I forgot that it did that. When you press middle C and then you go to D, for example, it's saying, well, what's the pitch variation or the pitch change between each note? In this case, that's called the pitch slope. And the pitch slope is going to determine, when you go to C to D to E, is it a whole tone each time you do that? Is it a semitone between, B and C and then C and C sharp, for example, and that sort of thing. It also allows you to control things like portamento, whether it's fingered or enabled or that sort of thing. So if your sound was monophonic, technically you can do it with polyphonic as well. So you could have a big pad, and you could have portamento enabled so that, the notes don't start exactly where you play them. They'll kind of fade, they'll slide into where you're going. This is one way to address it, but that's not what we're looking at today. We're actually going to be looking at the pitch EG. So this is our pitch envelope generator. And you'll notice oscillator 1 and the sub-oscillator, they're linked together, and we're using the AL1 engine. This process actually is the exact same, however, when you're using, let's say, the HD1 engine as well. So either one of those, it generally works the same way. Because what we're doing is we have a pitch EG that we're using to control the pitch of the sound. So oscillator and sub-oscillator, and then oscillator 2. So on the left, we're looking at AMS1 for both of these oscillators here. So we're just going to deal with oscillator 1 right now. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go to my mixer and turn oscillator 2 off entirely. We're not worried about the sound so much right now. We're more worried about just getting the pitch change. So when I play this note, I'm only going to be working with oscillator 1. I can adjust oscillator 2 later once I want to, tailor or craft the sound itself. But for the time being, I just want to manipulate the pitch. So first things first, oscillator 1, AMS is our modulation source. So what are we using to change the pitch? And you'll notice on the right hand side we also have intensity mod. So how much is the pitch being affected by? So for example, we could have something like our joystick in LFO1. Just to give an example, I'm going to say LFO1. Now by default it's saying how intense is LFO1, or how much is LFO1 affecting the pitch. Well, right now it's not at all. If we were to put this up, let's say here, it's going to make the pitch wobble. Okay, so you can hear that LFO1 was affecting the pitch by that much. Now what we can also do is we can say, well, I want to assign a controller. So in this case, I'm going to say joystick plus Y, and I'm going to say 2.6. And what that does is it'll stay flat until we push the joystick up, and here's how much it will be affected by. So you can hear this when I move the joystick. Okay, and so that's the general idea behind this modulation source. So we're saying LFO1, by default it'll affect it this much, in this case not at all, but then we have our intensity mod, alternate modulation source. In this case we'll use joystick plus Y, so when we move the joystick up, by default it's nothing, but it'll go as much as 2.6. Now if we were to put this at like 12, for example, it's going to affect it a lot. Okay, so the idea or the premise here is that we're going to tell the oscillator to be controlled by something. Now in this case we're actually going to turn the intensity mod off, because we don't need to assign the joystick. We're not doing that. What we are going to do, however, is we're going to assign an EG or an amp, excuse me, not an amp, but an envelope generator. So in this case I'm going to choose EG3. I guess you could technically use EG2 if you wanted to. It's not really super relevant. EG2 might already be assigned if you're manipulating like an existing sound. I'm just starting from scratch, but I'm going to use EG3. And what EG3 means is we have 4 amp or envelope generators. So you'll notice when I go to the EG page down at the bottom, we've got 4. By default we've got our filter, so that's how wide or closed the filter is by default. And then you have to assign how much the filter, or how much this EG will impact the filter. We have our pitch, which is the one that I said if you're using an existing sound, this could be in use already, so you may want to consider using like EG3 or EG4. Not necessary. It's really, they all kind of do the same thing. So I said I was going to use EG3. Again, you don't have to, that's just my choice. So under the pitch, we're saying EG3, EG3, this thing right here, is going to impact the pitch by how much. So in this case, if I want the pitch to go up by an octave, and when I say up, I actually mean I want it to be affected by an octave. I can say 12, so that's 1 octave. 24 is 2 octaves, 36 is 3 octaves, 48 is 4 octaves, and I don't think it does 60 yet. I think 4 octaves is the maximum that it supports. So in this case, I'm going to say, I'm going to use the envelope generator to impact the pitch by 1 octave. So now when I go to the EG, what's going to happen is it's going to start high, drop down, and then it's going to release. So in theory, what we should hear is it should start an octave higher and kind of drop a little bit as I let go of the key. So let's hear what happens. Okay, so the interesting part is that this envelope generator also follows the same ADSR that your amp does. So here's the thing that you want to be aware of. We have no sustain, we have no release. So this release, the sustain and release stage is gone, which means under this EG, our pitch EG, the sustain and release do nothing. So what we should do is actually just turn it off. And by turning it off, it means any changes that we make that happen in here for our pitch are going to be represented equally by our amp in here. Now we've already set up our amp, so when I go to my pitch EG, I can control kind of how things sound here, how long things take, and that sort of thing. So here, this pitch is going to go up and then drop suddenly. Okay. Now also keep in mind that this pitch that we want to manipulate should match the timing roughly as our amp. So in this case our decay is 78 and our slope is 10. So we've got 88 total kind of to work with. So under here I can go 78 and slope will go 10. Now what I'm going to do is, if you look at the where's my pointer here? So if you look at the envelope, you can see that the pitch starts rising. Now we could make this rise or fall actually as well. So we're going to manipulate the breakpoint. And the breakpoint is basically which direction is it going? So for example, I want the pitch to go down by an octave, and minus 99 means it's going to expand the whole octave, and then it's going to rise suddenly back to 0 because of this final slope. Because we've matched the timing, 78 and 10, under our amp generator, it should, in theory, take almost the entire duration to get to the very bottom, and then finally, it's going to snap back to 0 as the note releases. So let's take a listen. Okay, now we didn't hear it snap back to pitch, only because the duration is too short. If we were to like maybe make this a little bit longer, it should. Yeah, and it was very fast, but it went yip. That's my sound effect, by the way. Yep. Okay. So the question is how do we make the synth rise? So under our decay, we've got our timing right. This is the break section. So what we can do is we can push this all the way to the top. So what happens is when we press the key, it's going to start rising. And this decay curve, so if we look at the curve here, the decay curve is simply specifying, does the pitch rise happen very quickly at first and then slows down, or is it equivalent linearly the entire way? And so in most cases from these, when you're listening to these synth rises, they tend to be pretty linear for the most part. So I'm going to set this to 0. So what that means is as soon as I press the key, it's just going to start climbing at an equivalent scale of x to y, meaning for every second that it goes forward, it's going to increase in pitch in an exact equivalent amount. It's a 1-to-1 ratio. So that's what it means by linear. So I'm going to press the middle C and let's hear what happens. Perfect. Now if you wanted it to last longer, what you'd have to do is under the amp, we'd have to make this decay last a little bit longer. So maybe we want to make it 85. Now what that means is under our envelope generator that's controlling our pitch right now, we could make our decay 85 as well. If we don't, let's say we go 78. Here's what's going to happen. We're going to hit the top of the pitch, and then it's going to drop back to 0. And when it drops back to 0, it's going to go back to its original pitch, but the amp is going to continue to play the sound. So the pitch is going to go up and then drop back to 0. So let's listen to that. Okay, so because the amp is sustaining for, 85 units of time, we need to make the EG do the same thing. So what should happen now is it's going to climb the entire duration and then drop as soon as the pitch is done, or as soon as the amp's done. Okay, easy enough. Now what we're going to do is I'm just going to make this slope so it sounds like it fades out a little bit. Now what I need to do is, this is the amp side of things. Once the pitch is done, it'll eventually, it's like it fades out like most synths tend to. Not a lot of synths have a really, really, really fast release. So I'm going to leave this around here, and under my EG, I'm actually going to leave this, this sustain. What I want to do is I want to leave this at 99, meaning when the pitch gets to the top, it'll just stay at the top. It doesn't drop back to 0 regardless of what the amp does. So let's take a listen to that. Okay, easy enough. And because we have a little bit of a slope here, we could hear it fade out. It didn't just cut off abruptly. And now it's at this point that what we would have to do is go back and do the same thing to oscillator 2. So we would go EG3, we want to say we want to affect it by an octave. If we wanted to affect it by more, we certainly could. And now I need to go back to my mixer and turn on that oscillator. There we go. And just for stylistic purposes, under my oscillator, I'm actually going to change the tuning ever so slightly. So we get this little phasing effect. And under my common, I'm going to put it in unison and 3 voices, and we'll spread it stereo-wise. There. So I've got my EG ready to go, and now when I press C, we should hear a little bit of phasing. It might be a little bit louder, actually, so let me turn the volume on all of these back to 75. There. And let's take a listen. And that is how you create a synth rise. Now, if you wanted it to drop, again, the break and sustain from our envelope generator number 3 that we assigned our pitch to, we just drop it. And it does the same thing, except this time it's going to climb down. Now, the other neat thing, and I'll just kind of illustrate this very quickly, keep in mind that even though this is above and below, it's basically telling you in a positive ratio how much is the pitch being affected. What that means is if I go back to my pitch EG mod, I can actually tell my second oscillator to go -12, meaning the envelope generator is going to increase, it's going to increase by a negative amount, which means one oscillator is going to go up and this oscillator is going to go down. So let's listen. Now you could also do something kind of cool. You could do the THX sound by putting your final destination in the very center and making your start be up top, meaning it starts spread out and then slowly gets together. Okay, so that's just an example of some of the kinds of things that you can do with the envelope generator. And anyway, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. I hope this video was useful, and let me know if you get stuck.